This is Motivation. I'm Lori Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Chrissy Van. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode.
In the motorcycle world, you've got sport bikes, adventure, dirt bikes, cruisers, and the list goes on, all made by different brands. Often people identify themselves with the type of ride they have, and the Harley community is a great example, as Harley riders often soak up the identity of the brand. You can notice it in the clothes they wear, the places they meet up, the groups they join. But if you strip it all down, and they didn't have that, would it make them any less of a rider? Would it change who they are as a person? Today, we're talking all things identity and get clear on why it's important to have an awareness around what you view as yours. What you do for work isn't who you are. What you have isn't who you are. Who you spend your time with isn't who you are. So who are you? And why is it important to check in and ask the question? This is the Motovation.
Well, let's get at her. Today we are talking about identity and identifying as an identification and how much that plays a huge role in our lives, because your identity is essentially your belief system about yourself, who you are, the roles that you play. And then that belief system inadvertently, or not inadvertently, directly affects how you think, therefore how you behave. We talked about this in an episode way back when about how many thoughts a day that we think, that 70 to 80,000 thoughts, and how many of those are, ridiculing and not the best of thoughts. But where do those, where's the real root of how those thoughts get created in the first place? And it's really of like the beliefs about ourselves, and therefore the beliefs about the world around us and how kind of everything works and interacts. And you think of all the identities that we have, just in like the roles that we have. If you're a partner to somebody, I am this professional, or I'm a sister, I am, a daughter, I'm a friend. And then you've got those characteristics about yourself. I'm loyal, I am a helper, I am an advocate. The list kind of goes on. And every interaction that we have in a day, where our intentions are in that moment, or how we show up or how we behave, is like a direct correlation of how we identify, who we identify as. And I know we could peel the layer so far back in this episode to like, are we any of those things? If one is gone, well, then am I still that if I'm not in that role? Or if I do something that's a bit selfish, then am I not the helper that I thought? Like, who am I, kind of thing? Because if you peel it all the way, we're actually none of those things at the end of the day. All of those things, all the ways that we identify, some of them came from like birth, it was a part of just that natural character of, if you're a little bit more outgoing, or if you're a little bit more, introverted, all those things. Everyone has something they're a little bit more susceptible to. But early on, you start to identify as these things out of a bit survival, a bit of fitting in, a bit that, you got that positive reinforcement around, someone laughed at your joke, that felt good. I'll be funny again the next time. Suddenly you're the funny person, and that carries through. You've got all these different moving parts. But I think what we want to talk about really today is that how much of them are serving you. How much of them are we using as an element that really is pushing and progressing you forward, and is like I said, working for you and with you, and how many of these are holding you back and keeping you kind of imprisoned, or keeping the glass ceiling on. And the other component is that I want to kind of dive into, and I think we both do, is that certain things, certain parts of your identity can be a beautiful magic wand in certain areas of your life. But if you aren't aware of where you're using them as a bit of a curse within your life, let's say like you're stubborn, right? That's a part of your identity, is you can be very or strong-willed. Let's put it more in like strong-willed. Well, that can work really, really well in areas in which you have to push through fears, or which, you're getting a lot of doubt from other people or criticisms, and you're very strong-willed and you're pushing through to that other side. But if you're using it in times and when there's conflict resolution and you're not really hearing the other person, or you're not open, that can be a detriment So there's all these other things too, where you've got these pieces of your belief system about yourself that work in one situation to really benefit, but then not necessarily in the other. Even like we talked about in the set, I'm super, super helpful, and you help in moments in time that, really are beneficial for the people around you or yourself and as a whole community. But then other ways that you help for self-serving reasons, and or you're doing people pleasing, and at the end of the day, it's actually not in your best interest or even the community as a whole in the long run or bigger picture. So that all said, let's dive into for you, Chrissy, how has, what are some of the things that you identify as, and how have those, what have you had to look at to break free, and where have they served you? All the stuff, the things.
I think it's interesting just with you pointing out those qualities where we almost have an attached sense of pride to those ones that we celebrate about ourselves too. And you put it on a trophy shelf, so much so that you become so married and attached to it, where it is a detriment in certain elements of your life. And without the awareness, it will continue to be a detriment. One thing that's come up for me a lot in therapy as a byproduct of my lived experience, and therefore how I identify, would be a resilient person. Resiliency, inherently, when you hear the word, sounds like an incredible quality. And has it served me greatly in many elements of my life? Absolutely. But if you take anything on too grand a scale, resilient personality traits could be one where all of a sudden you're putting up with things that you shouldn't be, but you're like, I am resilient and I will move past this, instead of creating a boundary where maybe there should be a boundary set, where there probably should be a boundary set. So it's interesting just in the fact that we can identify as well in quote unquote negative qualities about ourselves too, where we become so married to a story or a thing that's happened to us that is therefore who I am and what you ultimately end up attracting to your life. But in the same thing, I think with any qualities that we have decided to collect or identify with ourselves, it's good to take a step back and explore, because it really can be the positive or the negative to your life. It's like on a fulcrum, where you have to find the balance of where is this going to serve me? And without an awareness around that, I think it comes down to the egotistical stories we tell about ourselves. Even something, and I know I always kind of go to the career element, but it's because it's a big one for me that I had to navigate early on. So much of the path that I chose was to do with forward, front, performative work, where when you talk about the positive reinforcement, it's all about seeking that. Was my performance good? Right. Oh, I have a pat in the back. Then this is how I should emote myself as a person. And I find that happens a lot in the broadcasting industry, where people talk about if your head will fit in the door, because an ego becomes so large because it's constantly fed of this persona is therefore who you are. And what you notice a lot in that industry that is rampant with layoffs at any occasion, we're heading into a recession, so I'm sure it will be another battleground, is that people struggle greatly with who am I if that is gone, because they identify as I am this personality. I am the talent. And if you strip that away, there is a feeling of being very naked. And quite prominently, my journal started in 2014 because I went through that exact journey. I had worked hard, got my career off on the foot. I had a TV job in a major market. And within a year, we went through layoffs and I lost that. And it's one of the best things that could have absolutely happened. It was devastating for me at the time because I was married to the identity. Like, I would like to think that I wouldn't have grown a massive ego around that path, but probably would have, because you're just kind of like, I'm nailing it. I'm this, I'm that. And when that happened, I literally was in that state of feeling very lost, very lost. I was 26. So granted, I feel like you're in a great age of self-discovery as it is, but it was the worst and the best thing that happened to me in that moment, because it's where I got to understand that this is not who I am. And these things that we attach to or decide to embody as who we are as a persona can be very fragile, or they can be things that you change. Like in the intro here, we made the reference into motorcycles, and the Harley culture comes to mind, which is extremely brand driven, and people double down and all of a sudden they do have the full gear and the Harley shirt collection from around the globe. But a motorcyclist is a motorcyclist. Like, you could hop on to any other bike. It doesn't mean that you're not a motorcyclist kind of thing. But we really do get so attached. And I think it is, I mean, even for myself, when you look deep down, comes from a sense of wanting to belong. Like, who should I be in this exterior world to find my place in this world where there's a million different possibilities?
And that push to be, so extremely unique, because each one of us, it's true, each one of us are special and unique because you are the only one that's had your unique experiences with your personality mixed with your perspective, all those different things. Like, you are your own very special and unique recipe. Where it gets driven into us and lost along the way, which was completely driven into me, was in the thing of like, you are unique and special in the way that, almost to the point where it's like, you're special among the people. Do you know what I mean? And so you get told these things as a young kid, and as you're growing up, it can put you in a really fixed mindset in and around that identity, because suddenly you stop taking risks, because that might call into question that unique thing about you. Because now I'm not very good at this thing, not as good as I thought I'd be. It wasn't as easy as I thought it would be, all those different things. And so you feel repelled towards it because it feels like you're not who you thought you were. Versus if you can change that identity around, yeah, I might have a natural ability for this. I might have a knack for this. This might be part of, my more purposeful work in this world, or whatever it might be in that regard that feels unique and special to you. But you put more of an emphasis on what actually matters in and around is like, I'm in a constant state of expansion and metamorphosis, really, because I might have identified at all these things as a kid and as a young adult and so forth, but I'm forever changing, like right down to
Here's hoping,
like, down to a cellular level. But we get pushed on this whole thing of like, you have to be so unique and special, and you have to stand out amongst the, billions that are here kind of thing. And so this pressure, this insurmountable pressure to be something so very special, versus, and that identity in itself, we're either lacking there, falling short, or we've already decided that we're all that thing. And so we also then get scared to take any chances towards what could be, because what if I'm not who I think I am? And you question it all, versus going into like, well, what if I looked at more of that expansive version of it and identified more as a curious person? If I identified as a constant lifelong learner, if I identify as all these other things that can work with myself, that it kind of helps you move past the glass ceiling, because you're not trying to, because it's terrifying. Those moments when you think, am I who I thought I was? And almost always the answer is actually going to be, no, you're not. No, the actual answer is like, no, you're actually none of the things that you think that you are. But we are having this wild human experience. And so there is these parts of yourself that are going to make you, successful at your jobs and your relationships and just your experience as a whole. And that in and around is identity and identifying as. But there is that flip side where you kind of go, it's all really made up. And we live in a society that has made up this insurmountable, unattainable, and setting up for failure, because this whole thing of like, you're a dime a dozen, you're the one in a million, and show it and prove it. And if you don't, you're a nothing. And it's all bullshit.
The part that I find, two things that I had one big aha moment, which I'll get to in a second, but the one point that you make is so poignant on the fact that I think a lot of times we look at this sense of identity, or who am I, when we feel like things haven't gone the way we thought they should for us.
Oh, yeah.
However, where I think the biggest missed opportunity, because when that happens to you, you have no choice but to look at yourself and do some inner work. Hopefully you do the inner work, or else you're just going to end up stuck. But I think the bigger detriment to people is when they identify so strongly as I am here and I have made it, because that's by far the most limiting state of mind. When you speak of breaking the glass ceiling, what they may not realize is that they're only approaching the ceiling in the basement, and it's actually a 62-story building. And therefore you've fulfilled this self-fulfilling prophecy of only getting to a certain level where there could have been so much beyond, right? It's like all of a sudden as you were speaking, I'm like, it is so easy to be like, I've made it and da-da-da, where really you've denied yourself this experience of life because you never opened yourself to the opportunity of it. You never bothered to look outside of yourself and this identity that you have created. The second aha moment I had here, though, was over our youth. Exactly that. We are notoriously, especially the millennial subset, and to a degree, the people behind us, we were raised on, you can be anything, you are special, you are unique, you can have it all. And obviously we know for the millennial journey, there's been a lot of struggles where our generational gap in regards to so many circumstances, we were not raised in the same environment as our parents, and everything is always evolving. So how could you possibly expect it to be? But statistically, we're actually a more disadvantaged generation than our parents for the first time that has ever happened in human history. And so what I find so fascinating as somebody, obviously my job is exploring trends in the fitness and wellness industry, is there has been this huge shift. So for so long, self-care, obviously we know has been a massive buzzword, but now there is this incredible shift to social connection, which shouldn't be too surprising for many people. We went through a pandemic where we were isolated and starved for connection. But one of the primary experiences that is gaining traction are these social collectives where, like, a lot of them are the sauna cold plunge, because you have to challenge your ego to be able to step into the water, etc. But the whole basis of them is to strip down in a group, preferably with strangers, is where a lot of these facilities are cultivating, so that they can generate a social connective conversation of just being raw and real, and basically exposing ourselves to that we don't have it all figured out and that we have curiosity. And I think it's very cool that it's our age group actually that are looking more for these experiences where we feel safe to show up and be like, guess what, guys? I may have thought I had it figured out for this entire time. It turns out I don't. And I need to sit here in a space that knows that's okay. Because as soon as you open yourself up to that, you open yourself to everything. It's like this exploration that you don't need to silo yourself in these certain boxes. I think to a degree, psychologically, it can be beneficial. I was reading a study particularly about people that identify, and you and I were talking about this too, so that's why I followed up, athletes versus exercisers. And embodying this athlete mindset can certainly be very serving when you have specific goals that you're looking to reach. So embodying a mindset to help you reach a goal, there is a benefit to that. But again, it's where I talk about the fulcrum or the teeter-totter. If you go too far one way or the other, that's where it stops serving its purpose. You have to almost balance yourself with a question always, right?
That's a really good way to look at it, in the sense of like, you're always, whatever you're identifying around, that you're, even when and if you're like, this is serving me, this is working with me, you have to also be the devil's advocate for yourself on the regular. So is that still serving you? Because that might serve you for that first year, and the second year into whatever it is that you are working towards achieving. Is that identity still working? Or is there a way to make it a little bit more zoomed out? Is there a different phrase? Is there a different, and also that's well and fine to just say it, but how much is that actually being being really implanted? How did you actually plant the seed, or did you just walk by someone else's field and you were like, that'd be nice. I'm going to do that good too. Yeah. Have you watered it? Have you done things around it to remind yourself? Like, let's use the athlete example. This is actually one that I use to start going to the gym every single day, because I was not that person. And so I was like, well, if I identified, because I had heard a podcast on it, and a guy that specializes in this, or that's his kind of expertise, and he was explaining how it works for the brain, and obviously you that's your belief system, therefore your behavior. And I was like, if I, rather than looking as I'm going to work out that day and it being something that I'm willing myself towards that isn't already a habit, all those different things, that was one of the tools I used is like, I am an athlete. So every day when I was like, do not want to go. And you're like, but you are an athlete. And it was like, and athletes go to the gym. They exercise. They do what, athletics.
You're like, it's my training.
Yeah. And so as soon as I put that hat on, it was incredible how much it pulled me towards wanting to work out that day, because I was identifying as it was, but I had to actively put it into practice. I couldn't just say, well, I am an athlete now and I'm going to go to the gym every day. And obviously there was habitual things that I put into place and other tools alongside that. But that was a big role of it. Even when I sit down to work and I feel the need to do something else, especially when I'm working from home. And I remind myself that as a self-employed consultant, that is my job to sit down. That is my job. And if I was at, where I'm a play therapist, there's no way I'd be like, I got to do the laundry. That wouldn't happen. But in my home, my belief system is I am home. I am Lori. I am, childless and a partner, and I can do what I want when I want in this home. And that's just not my reality when I need to get work done. And so I constantly have to shift those perspectives. But also here's the other thing. And I know I was using athletics and I jumped to consultant part, but the other aspect for using it as the flip side of it, the devil's advocate, is that also in my home, I am still Lori. That is just me in my home and for me and blah, blah, blah. And I have to switch that other part of my brain off when I get working too much, too long. Mm-hmm. So I have to also say, okay, well, now you're no longer this. Well, my desk sits in my living room. So I have to actively just be like, well, no, you are not a consultant right now. You are home. And so if I get an email from a client or I get this and this, I personally have to make those separations, because so I am not likely to message them back at 7 or go sit down even for it's 5 minutes. I get that probably is not a great idea as a startup consultant. That's what I choose. But I also identify as somebody that puts my mental health at the pivotal tippy top of my priority list. But you really do have to constantly check in with yourself of what identification is serving me best in this moment. I fuck up at it all the time. But like I say about all the other things I fuck up at all the time, I progressively get better and better and better. And then my life has progressively improved. My relationships have improved. My work ethic has improved. My discipline around the things that I do have improved. But it has been a huge component of, where are my thoughts? Where are my thoughts coming from? Well, I used to think I was like stupid, book smart. I was stupid. And then I realized, what language am I using? And then I started to ask myself, well, am I actually, or was it my experience in childhood? Who else was involved in that experience? When did I pick up that identity? Do I actually want to still carry it? And I was like, no, I couldn't wait to freaking get out of school, because I identified as a stupid person. Now that I identify as like an educated person, I love educating myself every freaking day, right?
Well, and I think the language that you used early on there when you said zoom out is probably the most important takeaway, because I think any time in life when we get so narrow focused on something is generally when we have a lot of discontentment that starts to brew inside. And I think
without a doubt, yeah,
it makes a lot of sense, because life is this extremely vibrant lived experience. And if we are literally pinpointed focused on one thing, no wonder our inner intuition and alignment is like, there's more to life. Like, maybe just take a step back. And then it's same when you look at something like meditation, why so many people, that's one I identified for so long. I was like, I'm not good at meditating. I can't be still. And then I literally had someone sitting across from me that was like, well, that's not the point, Chrissy. You're actually literally supposed to zoom out your lens and just have an objective point of view. It's not about quieting your mind. It's about creating space and distance from the thoughts, emotions, and having an objective look at it. But for so long, I was married to the identity. I am not this. It's the same when I look at the way I live my life. I would be like, I'm a messy person. And you know what, Lori? I'm still a messy person, because I tell myself I'm a messy person. And when we identify with qualities that maybe aren't our best qualities, it's interesting my biggest excuse for continuing to be a messy person is because I'm like, well, that's my identity. I'm a messy person. Why would I change it? It almost gives you this out to just be something that even when it's not serving you, to hold on to and be like, it's just the way I am. And it's taking the accountability out of it as well, right? Like at the end of the day, any shifts that we want to make in our life, whether they are a paradigm positive or a negative, it's up to us to do the work in one direction or the other. And especially if it's not something that's serving you, if you're doing very little work toward changing that, I find those are the things that are just going to pull you deeper, mainly because a lot of times those elements of our lives are associated with a lot of societal distractions that are aimed to keep you there as well. I think that when you look at the balance to do the work to actually make improvements and have a healthy perspective on ourselves and our lives, what we want, what serves others, there's a lot that's built in the world to maybe have you not embody the curiosity around or have those questions. I think for a lot of powers that be, the narrow lens is the goal for people. And I think that's why we're often very susceptible to keeping the narrow lens on. And even myself, if I were to do an audit of my life, I catch myself all the time. Like, even when I look at how I live my life now, I'm really content. I'm in a really wonderful place. But if I zoom out, there's a million other possibilities of how I could be choosing to live right now. It's just what I've decided to identify right now, that I'm a Vancouverite that likes to live in the city, that does my work in a hybrid fashion. And I do work for someone, like, you know what I mean? And it's kind of, you realize sometimes you're forced in life, being like, there's a million different other ways to live and it's circumstantial. But when we just have this one badge that we put on, or when you think of like back in the day, your Facebook bio, your about section, think of the about section. That literally is like where you live, what you work. Like there's no qualities or essence of the human in an about section, which really, when we look at the lens, like we're about so much more than what we do in our day, whether that be our hobbies, our jobs, who we're in a relationship with or not in a relationship with, you know?
The one that I remember hearing people say growing up, and then even as a young adult, and I used to really believe it about myself. I believed it when other people said it, was that that's who I am. That's just who I am. Or a leopard doesn't change their spots. People don't change. And I understand why it's said with conviction. Habits are difficult to change. Revising your life and then actually taking actionable steps in and around it are exceptionally difficult. Or pulling that lens back and seeing parts of yourself that aren't exactly the most appealing brings up really challenging feelings. So I understand why the majority of people share the message with one another and then begin to see it as truth of like, you just don't change, don't bother. You are who you are. If you're an angry person, or if you're, you might be a pessimist, you might be a this, or like the person that's, exceptionally joyful all the time, and that's who they are. So they never feel like they can have a miserable day, or, it doesn't necessarily have to be on that side of the negativity bias sort of thing. But all those parts of ourselves, like you just said, that we say, well, that's just who I am. Well, no, it's not. It's not. You might be more susceptible, therefore you played to it for most of your life, therefore it's a habitual part of you. But it's not who you are, and it's not concrete. And as much as that was a scary thing when it really shifted for me to pull out and deal with those challenging feelings, looking at things that weren't exactly the most appealing, or the parts of myself that I used to like hold at esteem, and suddenly I was like, that actually is not a great characteristic, or that's super self-serving, whatever it may be. It was also one of the most liberating things, because it was kind of like you demolish everything you kind of knew, or stripped it down to the posts as much as you could. And you were like, what a fucking mess. And you just had like all the debris around you. And you were like, somebody help me clear this up. But then you really go, okay, let's rebuild, and let's decide, I'm going to have more of a say of where these walls are going up, what flooring's going down. I'm going to make it sturdier this time. I'm going to actually, do it by code, maybe a little bit more. I do understand why that happens. I just wish that there was just more of a knowledge, and it's I should say wish, but it is coming along, especially with, as much as there's an overflow of knowledge and an overflow of information coming in, and that can really dilute everything. It's also exceptional in the way of it can't be, the powers that be are having a harder and harder time managing, and controlling the information that is going out. And so I would trade the mayhem for the fact that I am glad that that's still happening, because I know how much I've benefited from it. But I'm glad to see that though it's making people exceptionally uncomfortable right now, and they're feeling at a real loss of control, or that whole, like, you can't say anything, you can't do anything anymore, you can't. And you're like, well, no, everyone's talking about it. Everyone's holding each other accountable. We're pulling back the lens. We're saying, like, hey, take a closer look at this. And you're like, I don't want him, because I gotta look at everything, and that's fucking scary. And it can be, but it's also exceptionally liberating. And when you can move past the scariness of it, or even just dabble enough into the discomfort, you don't even have to jump in the deep end. Just get your toe and your foot in, of like, start to look at the stuff, get a little uncomfortable of what you thought to be true about yourself, but isn't, or can be different if you so choose, or you think it might expand your experience in life. And it's just exceptionally liberating. Exceptionally liberating.
Yeah, I think even the age that we are at now is such an interesting one to explore these things. I mean, I think any age, like, I wish I had these types of mindsets years ago, but then again, I'm like, would I be who I am and all the things if that wasn't my lived experience? No, like, this is my life. This is where I'm at. But when you talk about a quality that you deem a positive, and when there's a lot of reinforcement, I have had that so majorly, like, literally, I'm very happy to be a positive person. Like, my brain is literally, through practice and the grooves that are in there, wired to look on the sunny side, which is a quality that I wouldn't really trade for anything, because I do like that. And I think it serves me in a positive way most of the time. However, I did not have a built-in awareness until quite recently on the scale of my life, how there was very little space for me to express anything beyond that. And to be perfectly honest, if I were to look at my life growing up, because that's how I showed up so often and authentically, if there was any other way that I was presenting, it was very uncomfortable for other people, even as far as like uncomfortable for parental figures kind of thing. And so it was never really managed in the right way. Managed probably isn't the right word, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And so now it's like, as an adult in their 30s, I realize ways that this great quality about myself has also limited myself. Like, I am someone, when I show up in relationships with people, I have beautiful relationships, but admittedly, there's walls there that people wouldn't even know. Like, I have a lot of trouble letting any of those down, even in therapy sessions, where I've quite candidly said to my therapist, like, I feel bad for you that you had to listen to me. I'm paying this woman a lot of money to listen to me.
It's literally her job. I am so sorry.
This is like a constant where I'm like, I know this is what you're here for, but there's been so little, like, this all feels so uncomfortable for me to break up with and show up and admit when things are going wrong. Or, like, she even pointed out that there was like strong levels of like resentment and anger in there, which are qualities that I did not identify with. And the problem of not looking at that ever in your life is that if that's part of who you are, but not necessarily how you've identified, then those buried things that you're not looking at are probably not serving you in certain elements of your life. Like, you have to be open to disassembling your perceived notions of yourself in order to work through elements, because it's not even necessarily of having it not serve you or serve you. Like, you literally need time to process as well ideals that you have set out for yourself or have told yourself that you are. And then when you realize like, oh, lens shift, maybe that's not the whole picture or the whole story. I think one of the most powerful things you said this entire podcast, Lori, is the zoom out, because it is so true. When you start taking that lens backwards and then you're like, okay, there's a little bit more to look at there.
Yeah. That zoom out is anytime I get hyper focused on something, if I'm upset about something or I think something isn't the way that it should be, and I could feel the like emotions building in and around that. It's one of the exercises that I use where like in meditation, where I'll quite literally picture it as like a zoom on your phone, where it's like my eyes are zoomed into the situation. And then I'll zoom out in regard of like, I am only thinking of it from my personal experience. And again, what comes down to how I identify of what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, all those different things. And whoever or whatever the situation is in which that I am having that really extreme reaction and around or response, there's a whole counterpart, or there's a whole other, sequence of things that are taking place for that identifying, person, and for them, that feels as real as it is for me. So whose is the realest of all? Is it mine? Is it theirs? And it's neither, because it's only in and around my very, very intense, hyper-focused situation that I am. So as soon as I make that zoom back and recognize that someone else is having that same experience from their perspective and it helps me to remind myself of how made up my experience is. I'm not saying there isn't realness within that experience, or there isn't things that still need to potentially be talked through or worked through, but maybe it actually doesn't too. And when I zoom out, I can have a bit more clarity of whether, and if I am having a conversation in and around, or there is steps to be taken, that it's not from such a hyper identified perspective.
Like a personal, like taking it personal.
Because that's what it is, right? It's my personal perspective. It's through my personal lens, my personality. And so pulling that back and I'll have to do it sometimes like 10 times a day, because I'll find myself zooming in. And then I'm like, okay, pull back. 10 minutes, 20 minutes later, zooming in. Like, have you ever had it where you're not that hungry, but you just want to eat something, and you go and you're like, I don't need to eat. You're bored, you're this or that. And then you walk yourself through why you don't need to eat. And then a half hour later, you're like, what am I going to eat? You're back. It's kind of like that, where your brain just wants to hyper go, but also recognizing too, that's the part of you that's wanting to make sense of it so that you can be okay with it, or it can be solved so you can emotionally move on. That's our need to control the situation. So when you pull back, you're actually giving that alleviation just from not from a place of control, not from a place of being right. You end up doing it from a healthier state of recognizing that there's more moving parts than being right, wrong, and sometimes you just have to feel that feeling and let that dissipate. Sometimes there's no action to be taken whatsoever with any other people, parties, or situations. But that's where the zoom out also happens, is like, actually, this has nothing to do with that person. This actually has to do with something that's been going on outside of it, a lot of different moving parts. And so I have to just breathe through this moment and let this feeling dissipate. But until you move out, and I know that doesn't necessarily have to do with the crux and core of identification, but it really is so highly, what's the word? Like it's so interconnected that it still is one and the same. Or you're pulling back and saying, what part of my identification, here's an example. I'm the helper, and I was helping them, and they turned around and they were assholes to me, and I was just trying to help them. Well, did they actually need help? Did they actually ask for help? Or were you interjecting yourself? Or was that self-serving of you needing to feel or have validation that you're exactly who you think you are? So you went out subconsciously looking to who you could help so that you felt better about yourself. And then you were pissed off because they didn't appreciate you. You weren't even on their radar that day. they didn't actually need any help. What are you, but because you were in a place where you were self-serving, even though you genuinely thought like, I'm just going to be helpful. Well, that's where you pull back to of like, hey, I feel really unappreciated, all those different things. Well, where do I feel underappreciated? What did you do? What was the interaction? What was happening that day? So yeah, all of the above, when you zoom out, it just tremendously helps sanity.
Well, and it just shows how big a role the ego plays too, especially when you speak to like
right?
seeking things out that we don't even realize, just to have this inner validation, just so our ego can be like, there, our little
You're exactly who
earthling
you think
persona.
you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Sleep tight tonight. You exist. You're special.
Yeah. He was kind. He was strong. He was important.
Yeah, he was as important. So it's like, it is. It's one of those things that with, obviously I'm not saying from a state that like, I hope we've changed your lives today. But I feel though that this topic is probably one of the most important ones that we've ever kind of talked about. Because if I think of all the other discussions when we talk about like, toxic people in your life, or having awkward conversations, or the negative thoughts that run through your head, or finding your motivation and what tools, or building new like all the stuff that we talk about. If you really think about it and you zoom out, the word of the
There
day,
it is.
Is that this is where it really begins, the root of it all, of where it all flows, and how serious it is to like take an inventory of who are you identifying as, take inventory of where you're placing those, where they're showing up, where they're steering your life, because that is at the driving, because that's where your thoughts come of like your perspective of yourself, others, and the world around you is your belief systems, and your belief systems come from identity in many ways. You got spirituality and all the, stuff, but like our human experience. So, in our bodies and our day-to-day life.
That's a freeing thought. And on that note, does that bring us to where we sing motivation? Maintenance. That was a fun one. I identify as a really talented singer for that jingle.
You should.
So what is your little tip du jour?
I would choose 5 of your most not in depth. What would it be? That's not the word. 5 things that you find that really drive your day-to-day life that you identify as. So maybe it's your job, who you are in your family. Where do you spend the bulk of your time? And then what's your biggest hat that you wear within that world? And ask yourself of like where they might roll over into one another, that they're not exactly, helpful, how it is helpful, and also where it is. So let's say you have your profession, like myself, when I talked about the consulting. So you're like, okay, I'm a consultant and I'm a helper and I'm an advocate in my job because of what I do with children and so forth. Okay, that's great. But it's also one of those things where it's like, well, where am I showing up in those roles and that identification that's really helping? And where am I showing up in those roles in which I might be doing like you think you're some sort of superhero, and that might be, blocking you to hearing people's experience, let's say, because you know best or whatever. So it's really looking at like, well, where is it expanding that work, and where is it maybe holding me back from having the full experience and of that work, that same work. But find 5 things, 5 main roles, and start to play with them and look at them in your day and how you show up in them, and where you just subconsciously were, had a belief system around something that isn't actually productive or expansive or builds the best relationship with yourself and others. That's where I'd say start.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think that when you're taking that quiet time, either at the beginning of your day or the end of the day, maybe if you have that space for reflection, play the game. Who am I? Who am I if? and look at things in your life that you do. Maybe it's your hobby. Maybe it's riding. Who am I if I wasn't a motorcyclist? Who am I if I wasn't a content creator? Who am I? And literally look at that, because I think that when you peel it away, it helps you really take a rooted look at the essence of who you are as a being, and also where there's flexibility, also where there's space to grow. Also understanding that there are a million possibilities out there too of what you could maybe add into your identification toolkit that might serve you better, and ones that maybe you're like, who am I if? And maybe it looks a little brighter on the other side of that. But taking stock of those, who am I? Because I mean, just because I had that experience in my 20s, I still battle that, where you realize how attached you get to roles that we play in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so taking that step back and playing a little game of who am I? And I think just knowing that probably the strongest things when you peel back the layers in our life is normally our connections to other people are the strongest underliers, mainly because I think we are a collective and a collection, and we don't look at that enough. And that when we peel back our layers, a lot of times our value systems in this earthly experience are very simplistic. Like when you strip away the things, it's actually all quite simple in the most complex way. Right. And I know that's getting really like metaphorical, what have you, but I'm like, it is very true when you peel it back of what truly matters to all of us. And it's really love, which is going to sound super woo-woo, but it's true.
Not. When you really peel it back, no matter what country you live in, no matter what culture you've been, surrounded by, you're looking for connection. You're looking for purpose, not this like giant purpose, but like a purposeful day, a purposeful life. And you're looking to have moments of enjoyment, and like that's at the crux of that. That is love.
Yeah.
It's just, and you, like you said, we make it so much more complex, and it is more complex. And it right now it's a very much a runaway train at the moment with the complexity that we've created, but it is really like coming down to it is like, well, how do these identifications serve the more simplistic, real needs of us as human beings, to have quality of life, not extravagance necessarily, you know what I mean? And those get mixed up of like what real quality of life and the extravagance of what, that's what's going to bring you quality of life. That's a lie. It's been proven over and
non-starter.
Over. It's like, ask any, they'll say, my money might have made things, easier for sure. But that doesn't solve the crux of it all. I think actually yours is the most perfect one to really begin with. And if you did the one that I suggested, I would do that after Chrissy's. Because I think that's the first foremost is like just get curious and aware, just like throwing that around and just get comfortable with the notion that you're not who you think you are and that it's a working document. And then you can now start to be like, all right, what edits do I want to make to the document that is me? We
love that.
So, okay, well, quotes. Now we're at quote time, and I finally remembered once again to get back on the quote wagon.
Marvelous. My quote is, it doesn't have a name. I didn't research further. It probably does. But identity is never static, always in the making and never made.
Oh, that's great. All right, mine's Tony Robbins. Identity is the incredible, invisible force that controls your whole life. It's invisible, like gravity is invisible, but it controls your whole life. It felt better when I read it.
I was waiting for just your sultry voice to close us off, because it always sounds better when it's you.
Oh.
It's just it's the warmth of your timber.
And I realize that this is just a natural thing that takes place, but it's definitely getting deeper as the years go by.
That's nice.
It's going to be here when I'm in my 50s.
Just think of the range of karaoke songs that you can do over the time.
Oh, yeah. I'll do a lot of Johnny Cash, I feel.
There you go.
He'll become my counterpart. So that, my friends, is your motivation.
You've just listened to the Motovation Podcast with your host, Chrissy Van, and me, Lori Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motovation Podcast and visit our website at themotovation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.